Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Welcome to part 2 of our podcast, Mild Cognitive Impairment, How to Protect Your Brain. My name is Jerry Hickey. I'm a nutritional pharmacist. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer over here at Invite Health. And I want to thank you for joining us today. In the first part of this, in part 1 of this episode, I discussed what mild cognitive impairment is, what's the difference between that and Alzheimer's, how can you slow it down with lifestyle like exercise and a good diet, and I offer to give you the Mind Diet if you contact me. Just send me an email. But now I want to talk about specific ingredients in foods. I want to talk about supplements and foods that have been studied in people with mild cognitive impairment. And then I'm going to give you also, just off the tip of my tongue from my brain, supplements that are really good for your brain that, although they haven't been studied in mild cognitive impairment, to my knowledge, they're great for your memory, they're great for your brain. But first, things that have been proven to help people with mild cognitive impairment. So let's discuss it, a quick synopsis. We all can have some memory loss as we get older. We can all have that senior moment where we forget where we are in a sentence or the next word, etc. It can happen. That's natural. And we can all forget to pay a bill, and we can all forget, where we put our keys. Normal. But mild cognitive impairment is a step up. You could still live at home, you could still cook your food, you could still go shopping, but your brain just obviously is not functioning well. You know it, your friends know it, your relatives know it, your kids know it, your wife or your husband knows it. I mean, the problem with mild cognitive impairment is that many of these people will slide into Alzheimer's. So how do you defend your brain? Well, first of all, green tea. There was this great study that I'm just going to do from my memory, where they gave young people a green tea drink, but they removed the caffeine-related ingredients like the theophylline and theobromine. They removed whatever mild stimulants are in there. And just a note about that. There are great things in green tea that calm you down and prevent you from developing high blood pressure. So although green tea has stimulants in it, it's not as much as you would get in a cup of coffee. That's point A. And point B, the other ingredients buffer it, so you don't wind up getting anxious or nervous or hyper on green tea, and it doesn't raise your blood pressure. So although it can wake up your brain and make you more focused and attentive, it doesn't raise your blood pressure. It doesn't increase your pulse rate, which is how fast your heart is pumping blood. It doesn't make you nervous or anxious like the caffeine in coffee would do. So green tea is fine. But they gave young people a big drink of green tea where they removed the caffeine-like substances. They're called methylxanthines. They removed all the methylxanthines. Caffeine is a methylxanthine. So they removed the methylxanthines. And they had these people on powerful functional MRI machines, and they saw that the parts of the brain, because of the polyphenols in there, they're called catechins, things like EG, CG, which is epigallocatechin gallate. There's like 20 of these substances. The polyphenols in the green tea were stimulating the brain to work better. That was a very interesting study. And then a bunch of studies came out of Germany and Italy, et cetera, that people who drink green tea, they have a lower risk of memory loss, they have a lower risk of dementia. So can green tea help people with mild cognitive impairment, which is the prodromal stage for many people before Alzheimer's, meaning that many people with mild cognitive impairment will eventually drift into Alzheimer's. So let me read you the name of this study again. It's in the journal Nutrients. It's researchers from different academic research institutions in Japan. And here's the title: Green Tea Intake and the Risks for Dementia, for Alzheimer's Disease, and for Mild Cognitive Impairment. And Cognitive Impairment, a Systematic Review. So let's just explain what that's talking about. Anybody can have some memory loss. That's called subjective memory loss. That's the kind like if I turned around to my wife and I said, I'm losing my memory, she'd say, no, you're not. But you're forgetting a word here or there, or it's harder to remember the name of a restaurant. That's fine. That's nothing. But then there's mild cognitive impairment. Now we're talking about real impact on the brain, which can convert to Alzheimer's disease. So there's a lot of evidence that food helps protect you from dementia. A lot of evidence. So their hypothesis is that green tea can reduce your risk of dementia, of Alzheimer's disease, and of mild cognitive impairment. So let's talk. A hypothesis is an idea based on something. There's something telling you that something's going to work. Okay? And in this case, will green tea protect the brain from memory loss? The hypothesis, you need 2 studies to prove it, and then it becomes a theory. It's more credible. So if you have 2 studies proving a hypothesis, now it's a theory. Now it's real. So they found out, reviewing a whole bunch of studies, 3 cohort studies. A cohort study, they pick out a huge segment of a population. So they might go to New York City and pick out 30,000 people in Manhattan. Okay, I'll just give you an idea. And then they might say, well, let's look who developed dementia out of this group. And what was the difference? What were the people doing who didn't develop dementia, and what were the people doing who did develop dementia? Can we find anything? So 3 cohort studies shows that green tea is great for the brain. It lowers the risk of dementia, it lowers the risk of Alzheimer's disease, it lowers the risk of mild cognitive impairment. But also 5 cross-sectional studies. So there's a variety of studies here showing that green tea helps prevent cognitive impairment. So here's a different study. It's in the Journal of Medicinal Food. And they're looking at green tea and one of its constituents, L-theanine. And does it improve memory and attention in people with mild cognitive impairment? So these people already have lost memory. So green tea, you know what that is. And by the way, green tea works better, it seems, if you don't put milk in it. Instead, you put lemon in it. You absorb the polyphenols in the green tea better if you use lemon instead of milk. L-theanine is an amino acid found in the tea plant. There's not a lot of it, but it's kind of like a moment of zen. It calms down the brain. It protects the brain. It's a great anti-inflammatory in the brain. It's really good for your mood. Like people who are really stressed out, like I have professional drivers who will call me and say, you know, Jerry, I'm driving in Brooklyn, I'm driving in Manhattan, and it's really nerve-wracking. I'll say, take an L-theanine. It doesn't make you sleepy. You take 100 milligrams, but it's going to get rid of all that stress and anxiety and nervousness. So it's the Journal of Medicinal Food, and they're using the Global Deterioration Scale. The Global Deterioration Scale has 7 levels. Level 4 to 7 are levels of dementia. Level 1 is no dementia. Level 2 is mild cognitive impairment. Level 2 is definite decline. Level 3 is mild cognitive impairment. And then they're also using the mini mental state exam, has a maximum score of 30. Between 21 and 24, the odds of dementia and mild cognitive impairment is increasing. So they're using these 2 in the study. So it's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled human clinical trial. 91 people with mild cognitive impairment. They're looking at their global deterioration scale test. They're looking at their mini mental state exam. And they gave them a combination of green tea with L-theanine or placebo for 16 weeks. And it really meant something. It really meant something. Their mini mental state exam improved. Their global deterioration scale improved a little bit. But their attention was better, which you would expect when they improve in these tests. Their memory improved. Word reading. I mean, all of these things were improving. And they found out that the brain waves and parts of the brain involved with cognitive functions, alertness, etc., were improving, and like the temporal lobe and the occipital areas, etc. So really, the green tea really meant something. And people with mild cognitive impairment, the brain was more active and more focused, and they were doing better on neurocognitive tests. So that's pretty cool. So green tea is safe. Green tea does have a lot of data that it helps slightly lower the risk of breast cancer, which is a common cancer. So if you can lower the risk of breast cancer by 19%, that's protecting thousands of women. They also show that green tea helps lower the risk of prostate cancer. It's a common cancer. So if you can lower the risk of prostate cancer 20, 25, 30%, that's protecting thousands of men. There's also studies that green tea helps prevent the formation of polyps in the colon, which should help lower the risk of colon cancer. There are studies that people who drink green tea, that not only do they live longer in general, they stay healthy longer. Their health span extends. So there's a lot of good studies about green tea that it lowers the risk of stroke, it lowers the risk of heart attack. Lots of good studies in green tea. It improves the effects of exercise on bone and muscle and controlling your blood sugar and burning fat. So I'm not surprised having these health effects that it would also be good for the brain. And there's a lot of evidence that green tea is good for the brain. But the same with cocoa. Cocoa in general with older people works as an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory agent in the aging brain, which is important because antioxidant levels decline in the brain with age dramatically. People in their mid-50s and 60s have much lower levels of antioxidants in their brain. That available pool of natural enzymatic type of antioxidants such as superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase. And the brain is a super high energy organ. So when you're using oxygen and calories, sugar for energy, there's always a byproduct of peroxides. They escape from the cell. And these peroxides damage the fats in your brain, and since 60% of your brain is typically lipidy fats, that's very destructive for the brain. So green tea and cocoa, besides having specific effects on the brain, also help resupply the brain with antioxidants. But cocoa also reestablishes circulation to an aging brain. And that's important. Harvard tried to put a figure to it. They canvassed a lot of Americans of different ages, and Harvard Medical School said circulation to the brain generally declines between 10 to 14%. Other studies by Harvard, within 2 weeks, having real cocoa resupplies circulation to the brain by about 11%. So it's almost perfectly offsetting the diminution in circulation and the supply of nutrition to the brain that occurs with aging. So here's a study, Medicina. It's a good journal, by the way. It's the Department of Biomedicine and Prevention, University of Rome, and the National Institute of Health in Rome, Italy. It's the efficacy of cocoa polyphenols in the treatment of mild cognitive impairment. Okay, does it work? How good does it work? So let's read this study. I'll translate as I go if I have to. We're not going to read what mild cognitive impairment is. I already explained that. These are people with mild cognitive impairment between the age of 56 to 75. They were forgetting things. Of course they were. They have mild cognitive impairment. They wanted to see if cocoa helped. They split these people into two different groups based on their mini mental state exam range. And they found that patients with real disruption in their brain function and their cognitive functions, they tended not to have a lot of polyphenols. But the people, so this is retrospective, it's looking at the facts after. So the people who had a lot of cocoa with mild cognitive impairment had less deterioration of brain function. That's what it came down to. So here's the journal that I love, Nutrition in the Hospital. It's University of Madrid. Madrid's one of my favorite cities on the planet. It's just a wonderful city. They're using data from a follow-up study, the senior study on nutrition and cardiovascular risk in Spain. And people who consistently consumed cocoa, better than 10 grams a day with mild cognitive impairment, did better on their mini mental state exam. So if they had mild cognitive impairment, they tended to do better mentally. But also the elderly Spaniards with healthy brains, by consuming cocoa at least 2 or 3 times a week, lowered their risk of developing mild cognitive impairment by 61%. So that's something. So if you already had some deterioration, it helped it function better. But if you didn't have deterioration, it helped prevent it from happening in the first place. Now, the University of L'Aquila in Italy published their findings in the journal Frontiers in Nutrition. They looked at 50 human clinical trials. And they said, hey, no doubt, flavanol-rich cocoa, it's the flavanols in cocoa that are so good for the brain. Actually, there's a hierarchy of nutrients in the brain, and there's a hierarchy of nutrients in cocoa that are good for the brain. Salsolinol, phenylethylamine, methylxanthines like theophylline and theobromine, but then also the flavanols. And these things make the brain feel happy, connected, energetic, focused, improve circulation in the brain, do a lot of really good things in the brain. And they said there's no doubt flavonoid-rich cocoa is great for the brain. I'm paraphrasing here. It protects the brain in vulnerable populations over time, so people who have a real risk of losing memory. So they looked at cocoa flavanol ingestion in the elderly, and they found notable effects for paying attention, for how quickly the brain works. We call that processing speed, like how much information can you take in, how quickly, and how quickly can you figure things out. Working memory, so your memory while you're doing something. Verbal fluency. But they found in the older adults whose memories already have started to decline, or who have mild cognitive impairment, appeared to benefit the most from ingesting cocoa over a long period of time. Well, listen, cocoa is good for your heart. It's good for your circulation. Cocoa helps lower your bad cholesterol. Cocoa helps improve your insulin sensitivity. Cardiometabolic health is important for the brain. So when you improve things in the body that are risk factors for heart disease, stroke, and heart attack, you're also improving activities in the brain. So there's going to be a connection with that too. So let's see what else they said. These are researchers in the University of L'Aquila. If you look at the underlying mechanisms, the cocoa flavanols have beneficial effects for cardiovascular health and can increase cerebral blood flow in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. Now, that's important. The parahippocampal dentate gyrus. The hippocampus is where memory takes place. In the daytime, you learn something. You store it in your hippocampus, which is a temporary holding zone for your memories. At night, you shift those memories from the hippocampus into the long-term memory storage sites in the brain. So the hippocampus has something lying next to it. That's why they call it the parahippocampal, next to the hippocampus dentate gyrus. It's kind of like the doorway into the hippocampus. These two organs have to work together for memory. They have to be wired together. They have to fire together and work in tandem for your memory. And that's what they found. They found that these structures that are affected by aging, but also that decline even more in people with severe age-related memory loss, like mild cognitive impairment, they were coming back online. So 50 human clinical trials published in the Frontiers in Nutrition that if you, even one dose of cocoa enhanced circulation to the brain and was helping sustain memory performance, was offsetting fatigue, etc. But if you had it habitually, it really helped offset challenges to your memory that occur with aging. So here's the last one I'm going to look at. It's in the journal Hypertension. The journal Hypertension is one of the journals of the American Heart Association. And they found that older people with mild cognitive impairment did better with all different cognitive functions, including memory and how quickly the brain worked, which we call processing speed, if they drank cocoa. Now, just a word of caution. When they process cocoa into chocolate, you may lose a lot of these things that are beneficial for the brain, especially the flavonols. So milk chocolate will have very little. Dark chocolate, it's hit or miss. Maybe it'll have them, maybe it won't. But I do know that dark chocolate, even like a couple of squares of dark chocolate, is good for the heart and the brain. But cocoa's better. Really go with cocoa. And make sure that cocoa has supplement facts. Supplement facts means the cocoa is being sold as a supplement, not a food. Because when it's sold as a supplement, they have to check it for cadmium and lead and mold and everything. So go with cocoa with a supplement facts box on the panel. That shows you that they're taking better care of it. So in this study, they're giving older people with memory loss and mild cognitive impairment different strengths of cocoa. And the more flavanols in the cocoa, the better their memory did. So if they had a cocoa with super high flavanol levels, so that'd be like 2 servings of our cocoa every day, right? They found out that working memory improved, executive function improved, short-term memory improved, long-term episodic memory improved, processing speed, global cognition. So all of these things, like remembering the name of the book you're reading and the name of the author, remembering the name of the restaurant you went to last week, remembering that you read a book 20 years ago, all of the judgment, problem solving, all of these things were improving in cocoa. And cocoa is not the only supplement that improved mild cognitive impairment. There's also Alcar, which I take every day. I tend to have cocoa every day because I make a drink that's great for my body. After I exercise in the morning, typically on my bike or swimming, I have a scoop of flexible HX, we call it Flex HX for my ligaments and tendons, a scoop of College X HA for my skin, hair, and nails, but also my bones and my joints and my spinal tissue and my meniscus and my knees, a scoop of whey protein for my muscles, and then I put a half a scoop of the cocoa in there for my brain and my heart. So I have that typically Monday through Friday. But Alcar is something I take away from food. I have a product, Alcar with ALA, I take away from food. The combination of these things is great for your brain and brain energy and your mood. So this is the Department of Biomedical and Biotechnological Sciences at the University of Catania and the Department of Neurology at the OC Research Institute in Italy. A whole bunch of academic research institutions throughout northern Italy. And they're looking at Alcar in people with cognitive decline. Does it slow it down? So they said there was a meta-analysis previously in the year 2003 that showed that Alcar slowed down memory decline. But this is an updated meta-analysis. Okay, it's an updated meta-analysis for the year 2020, so it's a very recent analysis. And they found, yes, that Alcar helps slow down memory loss in general, but it's also in people with mild cognitive impairment. It helps restore the membrane of the cell, that's the outside of the cell that makes the brain work. Synaptic functioning, that's the connection between the brain cells that allows them to communicate with each other. Cholinergic activity, in other words, acetylcholine, that's the neurotransmitter for repairing your brain, for solving problems, but also for memory and learning and logic. Promoting mitochondrial energy metabolism, so energy production in the brain, protecting the brain from toxins, protecting the brain from the death of brain cells. All of these things have been proven with Alcar. So here's serum levels of Alcar along the continuum from normal brain aging to Alzheimer's disease. And I've read this study a couple of times on my radio programs. And here's what they found. People with mild memory loss, it's called subjective memory loss, their Alcar level is a little bit lower than superagers, people with a great brain, right? And people with mild cognitive impairment, there's a bigger decline in Alcar. And then people with Alzheimer's, there's practically no Alcar at all. And that's a lot of studies showing that there's Alcar is supposed to be in the brain, but its activity declines with age because the enzyme that makes it work, carnitine palmitoyltransferase, declines in activity, but giving Alcar brings back its function. So here's the International Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology. It's Imperial College University of London. It's a meta-analysis of randomized placebo-controlled double-blind human clinical trials, Alcar versus placebo in people with mild cognitive impairment and people with mild Alzheimer's disease. And I kind of have to end this, but it's the same thing. They found that people with mild cognitive impairment, Alcar was improving their brain function and slowing down memory loss. And they found that people with mild to moderate Alzheimer's, Alcar even improves their memory, albeit it's temporary because eventually, unfortunately, Alzheimer's wins. But here's a study I love. This group of researchers from the University of Massachusetts Lowell have done a series of studies. It's led by a guy named Dr. Thomas Shea. He's at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And in this study, they're working with Loyola University in Baltimore, Knox College in Illinois, and Framingham State University in Massachusetts. They published their findings in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And they're seeing if a formula that contains Alcar helps slow down memory loss and improves brain function in people with mild cognitive impairment. Now, they've already done these studies in people with normal memory loss, like age-related memory loss. They've already done these studies in people with mild Alzheimer's disease. And they found out this combination really worked. But the FDA, the government, will never let them make the claim. Even though this combination is working better than drugs, they're not allowed to make the claim because they're supplements. And that's just how it is. It's a bias, I'm telling you. So in any event, It's a 6-month human clinical trial. They gave a whole bunch of people with mild cognitive impairment a combination of folate, that's a B vitamin, vitamin E, vitamin B12, SAMe, because that's good for depression, NAC, that's a great antioxidant in the brain, and Alcar, or an indistinguishable placebo. They gave it to them for 6 months, or they gave them placebo. And then they did an additional 6 months, which was an open label study, where now the people on placebo were given a supplement too, because they've seen in previous studies that this really helps memory, so they feel bad we're helping one group of people with memory problems, we're not helping the people on placebo. So here's what they found. Over the first 3 months of using the combination, memory improved in people with mild cognitive impairment. And over the following 9 months, a year total, they held on to that memory improvement. So when they took the people that were on placebo for 6 months, there was no improvement. When they put them on this supplement, now they were only on it for 6 months. The first 3 months, their memory improved, and they retained that memory improvement, that level of improvement over the entire 6 months. So nutrition really has an impact on the brain. Other nutrients to look at for the brain would be lutein. If you want to look at folate, look at methyl tetrahydrofolate. That's the one I prefer. If you want to look at B12 in the brain, look at methylcobalamin. You also want to look at B1, especially a form called benfotiamine, which is a fatty B1 that works better in the brain, apparently. So there are things you could take for your brain. Fish oils or krill oil, I love them for the brain, especially the krill oil because it has astaxanthin, an antioxidant inside the brain cells, along with choline, a form of choline that gets into the brain to create acetylcholine for your memory. So there are things you could do for your brain. I want to thank you for tuning into the Invite Health podcast today. You could find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or just visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe and please leave us a review. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. I hope to see you another time on another episode of the Invite Health podcast, and thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.